Africa, in particular, is a region in which Islamic finance could and indeed should thrive. Some African countries have already started taking steps to support the local uptake of this financing mechanism. But to what extent is the penetration of IFSIs on the continent? What plans are there to grow this? To answer that, we had an in-depth conversation with Abdelila Belatik, the Secretary General of the General Council of Islamic Banks and Financial Institutions.
Islamic finance globally, and this has been for the last 50 years, has been seeing steady growth. This growth has continued, and for the last 10 years, probably we see around doubling the size of Islamic finance every 5 years. So for the last 2 years, and with the pandemic situation, even though the situation is difficult, but there was still, in particular, 2021, strong growth of the industry. And this is driven, of course, by existing markets in some parts of it, even though not the major markets, in the GCC region and the Southeast Asia, Malaysia. But also with new entrants where we see, for instance, Central Asia and Africa becoming gradually a contributor to this growth. And these regions, these where we see perhaps stronger growth, and we will be continuing to see it. So globally, when we talk about Islamic finance, I mean, in terms of market share and size, large part of it is with Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, UAE, Iran, Qatar. So we have this place in this region, and then we have outside in, for instance, Turkey, and in Africa, mostly in North Africa, we have Egypt, Morocco, and in sub-Saharan Africa, emerging countries with some good growth, South Africa, Nigeria, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, even though there are also many other actually smaller countries where we see the emergence and the start of Islamic finance. So if we talk about the African market in terms of size, so it's more or less, it's around 50 billion US dollar from Islamic finance assets, which in comparatively to the size of the continent and the Muslim populations and the potential of it is very small. Still, maybe it's around less than 2% from Islamic finance assets globally. And this is where we see there is a huge potential in many areas. Have potential for further growth in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched some of the data. You've also included, you've highlighted the parts of the world where Islamic financing has been growing over the past years. Africa, in particular, is a region in which Islamic finance could and indeed should grow. So, at the moment, just break down for us the penetration rate of the IFIS on the continent. What plans are there to also grow this penetration?
So the major markets, as I just mentioned right now, so we have South Africa, for instance, which has started with Islamic finance quite early. Before we have from in the other North African region, we have Egypt, you have Algeria, you have Tunisia. Morocco just started a few years ago, now 3 years, but he's having a strong growth already existing. In sub-Saharan Africa, we have also Sudan, which has very great, it's almost 100% of the finance sector is Islamic. There are many others that started recently, like Cote d'Ivoire, we have Uganda, Kenya also had some potential. So in growth, in kind of the current situation, so this has started maybe very recent in certain ways, apart from, as I said, perhaps South Africa and Nigeria, which maybe 5-7 years ago, South Africa perhaps earlier. The last 3 to 5 years, we saw an increased interest from African countries on Islamic finance, And that actually helps a lot, because then there is a need of having the proper regulation and regulatory framework, legal framework that would support this, or at least not to be in a short foresight. So since this has happened, so we see many other, like as I said, even in Ghana, in other Benin, in other countries that are starting. The point is, in these countries now, the scale or the size of the banks or the financial institutions, Islamic financial institutions, is still small. Now, if we talk about the potential is growth in many areas. So if we can mention, for instance, I mean, the population itself is, the African continent has one of the largest and with young population, so meaning really potential for economic growth and development. When we talk about like Muslim population, similarly, so a large number of Muslim population reside in Africa, even though we think that the value proposition of Islamic finance is not only for Muslims, it's for universal, for everyone. Everyone can do it, and this we see, or can use the services, and this we see it in different parts of the world, in the Western countries, or in, for example, some countries like Malaysia, where they have also non-Muslims, which also use equally the Islamic financial services. So young population, growth potential, economic potential, and growth combined with countries that start now to having this increased interest in Islamic finance and setting the regulation and the legal foundations for it. In addition, there are, I think, certain areas which are very, very beneficial and potential high growth for the continent, which is, for example, all the movement related to sustainability and sustainable development in the sustainable agenda, the global agenda. We think that in this area, the continent, African continent, has perhaps higher potential because of the transition will not require as much difficulties as it is for other places. So I think because transitioning from like a normal development to a sustainable one for the continent, we believe will be more straightforward, of course, if we do the necessary actions and we have the necessary support from governments and from regulatory bodies.
Drawing from what you have just said, the African continent has a lot of potential. And then you also touched on the key element of setting and creating the right regulatory environment. What gaps are there? What recommendations would you suggest when it comes to having the right policy framework that enables the IFSI to succeed here on the continent?
Yeah, well, I think in this regard, what we can say is that really there is no need to reinvent the wheel. But just looking at experiences of other countries. So even some Western countries that have implemented, that have already a regulatory framework. If we talk about banking sector, for example, there are certain amendments or certain details that needs to be addressed to allow for Islamic banks to flourish and to work, I mean, with that on a level playing field. So in this, we start seeing actions on this area by some countries, but still, so I think there is still work to be done on this area. You have areas, for example, as tax amendment that is needed to make it also on a level playing field for as the conventional finance. And this is the same. For example, also if we talk about the issuance of sukuk, which is the equivalent to like the Islamic bonds, equivalent to bonds. So for this, there is some amendments on the legal framework to make it conducive for the issuances of this. So there are certain areas, as we said, and there is, for example, even on the regulation, for instance, for the insurance sector, for the takaful. Because if you want to deepen the market, we have to make the infrastructure necessary, the Islamic infrastructure, financial infrastructure, which is needed from not only the banking sector, but look at the various sectors. like the capital markets from Sukuk and the takaful or the Islamic insurance. In addition, of course, that other areas that will be helpful, for instance, the Islamic funds, which is also very, very important globally for the Islamic finance sector.
The continuous changing environment, you even touched earlier on looking at the recent pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot that is happening and it is exposing the IFSI into new challenges. So innovation is key. What kind of innovations have been put in place, and how can you sustain growth over the next coming years?
Yeah, I think this is very important, and what we can say is what we have seen during the pandemic. In some ways, I mean, of course, there were a lot of challenges globally as we see from social, economic, and so on. But on the other hand, when we look at the banks and their operations, what we have seen is that, for example, for digital transformation and digitalization, many of the financial institutions, because of the closing everything, so they had to act very fast. And many projects that were for digital transformation that were planned for 3-5 years down the road, they were brought forward and they were implemented in reality in many of the countries, or we have members in a matter of weeks or months sometimes, or even weeks really. The beginning of 2020, from March to April, May, there were a lot of actions that were necessary to keep the economy going. So this was very helpful. Now, when we look really deeply into it, and I mean the world is witnessing, regardless of the pandemic, but like there is this digital transformation. We have all the digital currencies. I mean, we have all these disruptions that are going into the financial sector, and they are increasing now in terms of mobile payments, mobile insurance, mobile banking, and so on. There are many other things that are impacting the financial sector. But when we look at deeply into this digital transformation as seen by some of the Islamic banks, is that perhaps it needs some further developments, in particular in areas which have more sophistication. For instance, if we talk about artificial intelligence use in banking or in financial sector in general, robo advisory, the use of the big data. So maybe moving beyond traditional digital means as it is understood, like mobile banking, mobile payments, but really going further and benefits from all these new technologies. And we think that this is, of course, very is feasible, because even though the size of this of many of the Islamic banks is limited, but this can be done through partnerships with fintech companies, and this we see it happening. So they see a number of partnerships happening between like the traditional banks and other fintech companies, and probably this will be, of course, if we look at the African markets, African continent, I think this will be on the benefits of the continent, leveraging on the fintech, perhaps with collaboration with the banks or Islamic banks in particular. It is our subject here, to perhaps deepen the penetration and promote further financial inclusion for all the populations.